This episode is our second episode on Gameplay Ability UI, and in this episode we're creating a Gameplay Ability Pickup Actor where the moment I cross into it, it goes right into our hotbar. Let's get to it. Hey guys, today we're continuing our 5-part series on putting together our Gameplay Ability UI, and in this episode, our second episode, we're setting up our Ability Pickup Actors. If you haven't checked out the previous episode on how to set up the Ability Hotbar, I strongly encourage you to do so, and then also episode 26, because episode 26 is where we first began setting up a blueprint-only gameplay ability system, and all of the gameplay abilities that we're using are reliant on that system to go into our hotbar. So here are the key concepts for today, and the first one on this list, the blueprint interface, that's a big one. This is the first episode where in earnest we're beginning to talk about blueprint interfaces. I think we touched on it briefly on episode 29, but that was just implementing an existing out-of-the-box interface for Niagara. And this time we're actually going to create a brand new interface. And I'll talk about why interfaces are often more useful than casting depending on the situation and why we're using it in this case. So to start this episode, we need to go back into our player controller that we created last episode, the My Player Controller, and that's under my core folder here. And the reason we have to go into the My Player Controller is because all of our gameplay abilities are going to be stored on this blueprint. And we're going to start by creating some new variables. So I'll come over here, and the first variable is going to be empty hotbar slot. And this is going to be an integer. And the next one is going to be has hotbar space with a question mark, and this is going to be a Boolean. And this one is going to indicate to our player controller whether or not we have open space on our hotbar. And our last one is going to be our gameplay ability hotbar. And this one is going to have a type of our gameplay abilities. And you're not going to have this unless you followed along in episode 26, where we started a blueprint-only gameplay ability system. But basically the idea here is that we're going to have an array of gameplay abilities that correspond to each of the buttons on our hotbar. So if you have your own system of doing this, like you have an inventory system that's storing all your inventory items in an array, you could do it the same way. You would just use your inventory system type here. And the last important thing is to right-click on this type and make it into an array, because it's going to store up to 10 different gameplay abilities based on 1 through 9 and then the 0 on our hotbar. So now we need to create some functions. And the very first one we're going to create is called hotbar check. And this is going to determine whether or not we have space in our hotbar. And so it's going to have an output variable. I'll just do plus here, and the output's going to be has space question mark. And that's going to be a Boolean. The next function we're going to make is we're going to make find empty hotbar slot. And this is also going to have an output variable, and that's going to output the index, basically what number of the array is empty on our hotbar, and that's going to be an integer. Now the other cool thing about this function is it's going to be a pure function. So an example of a pure function, so if I say is valid, like this one up here, this is a pure function because all it's returning is a particular value. It's not actually executing anything. It's not actually changing anything on that function. Whereas if you search for is valid again and then you choose the one with the question mark, so this one is not a pure function. It's actually changing something. It's executing something directly in that function. And in general, if you have a function that just needs to return a variable and it's not actually changing anything directly in the function, it's a good idea to make it a pure function. I don't really understand all the performance implications of that, but I just know it's less performance intensive. And now we got to create one last function. So I'll hit plus here again, and this is going to be our pickup ability function. So this is actually what's going to pick up the ability. And this is going to have an input variable because we're inputting what ability we want to pick up. So this is going to be our gameplay ability to pick up. Actually, I guess the up is capitalized because up's going to be a separate word. And then over here, this is going to be, again, our gameplay ability object reference. So we are all set in our player controller. Let's compile and save. So now it's time to create a brand new gameplay ability actor blueprint. So for that, we're going to navigate back to our content drawer, back to content. We're going to go into blueprints, and I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to be called our gameplay ability pickups or pickup. And I'll go into that folder, and then we'll right click. We're going to create a new blueprint class, and this is going to be also from actor. And I'll go back into that, and I'll rename it. Rename gameplay ability pickup, and we'll go into that. So now we got to start thinking about how is our ability pickup actor going to be represented in the world. And typically these are handled with some sort of visualization, and there could also be a sound. Now we're not going to do the sound this episode, but for the visualization we're going to have a Niagara system. And for the Niagara system we're also not going to create that this episode. I'm just going to use the same Niagara system that we're using for the torchlight effect back in episode 23. And I always think the Niagara system for the gameplay ability pickup should be an accurate representation of what the player is actually getting. Now you could have that be somewhat of a mystery, but you want something that at least indicates that it's a pickup. And so I think Niagara systems in general work well for that because they can change, they can sparkle, they can do various effects. It gets the player's attention. But even before that, we need some sort of trigger that indicates that the player is going to pick it up. Now it could be some kind of button that the player activates when they're over the pickup actor, but I'm going to have this be nice and simple. The player just runs over it, and if they have room in their hotbar or room in their inventory, which is going to be episode 4, then the ability is just picked up. And so the way we're going to tell whether or not the player has run over the actor is we're going to have a collision sphere. So I can add a collision, and I'll choose sphere collision, and I'm going to title this the pickup collision sphere. And the only thing I'm going to change about this is we're going to make it a little bit bigger, so a sphere radius of 64. But then within that collision sphere, that's where we're going to add our Niagara component. So I'll add a Niagara component. Niagara particle system component, and we'll call it our pickup Niagara system effect, because I want to differentiate this from the Niagara system that's actually used for the gameplay ability itself. So now we need some variables for our pickup actor, and the first one I'm going to hit plus sign here, and our first one is going to be the Niagara system display, because this Niagara system display is what's going to actually set what our actor is up here. And I'll change the type to be a Niagara system object reference. And for all of these, I want to make them instance editable and exposed on spawn. Next variable we're going to do is the ability icon. So what icon is this ability going to have? And that's going to be a texture 2D. I suppose you could do something very fancy where you have a moving icon. I'm not that sophisticated, at least not yet. So we're sticking with texture 2D, instance editable and exposed on spawn. Compile and save. So the next 3 variables that we need are related to the gameplay ability itself. And for that, I'm going to take a detour and go back to our gameplay abilities that we started in episode 26, because I want to explain what we're doing in relation to the pickup actor. So this is under blueprints, gameplay abilities, and then gameplay ability here. So back in episode 26, we created some initial variables on our gameplay ability actor. So we have the intensity, we have the ability type, and we have the ability Niagara system. And there's going to be a couple of the things that we modify here today to get this working with the pickup actor. But basically all 3 of these, we need to set these on the gameplay ability pickup actor directly so that when we spawn an ability from the pickup actor, then all 3 of these are set. So let's go back to our gameplay ability pickup, and we'll create our first variable, and we'll title this the ability type. And it's going to be the same enum that we set up in episode 26. So it's our gameplay ability type. Gameplay ability, and it's this one right here. And once again, instance editable and exposed on spawn. Next variable, we're going to have our intensity. And this one's going to be a simple float, instance editable, exposed on spawn. And next one is going to be our ability primary Niagara system. So that's to be differentiated from the display Niagara system that's just showing up on the ability pickup itself. And so that's going to be, if I search for Niagara system, object reference, instance editable and exposed on spawn. And next we have to go over to the construction script. And on this construction script, that's where we're going to take the variable that's determining how the Niagara system for the pickup actor is going to display. And then we're connecting that to our pickup Niagara system effect component up here. So we could take this, get, and then from the execution pin, I'm going to set Niagara system asset. And it's going to be for our pickup Niagara system effect. And so that's going to be moved here. The Niagara system displays there. Connect this up there. So when we actually place this gameplay ability pickup into the world, that's where we're going to take our variable that we're setting here, and that's what's exposed on spawn here. And that's going to then be used by our system effect component here. So now we have to go to our event graph because we have to tell our collision sphere, okay, when something, or our player in this case, runs into that collision sphere, what do we want to have happen? And so I'm going to select our collision sphere, and I'll come over down, details panel, and on component begin overlap. The one thing I want to call out here is we've got collision presets. Automatically it's overlap alt dynamic. So it's automatically going to detect if our pawn, if our player overlaps this collision sphere. So we just need an event that's begin overlap. So I'll hit plus. That'll bring us the event. So now we just need to figure out, well, whatever actor overlaps this collision sphere, can it pick up the ability? And this could be really simple, right? Because I could just do cast to BP third person character, and then I could do it this way. But here's the thing. So we're going to have other characters in our game. And you know what I'm planning to do here, it might be quite different than what you're planning to do. So maybe this is not relevant to you. So if it's only your character that's going to be able to pick up these things, then you don't need to worry about what I'm going to do. So you could just cast your character and you're good to go. But in the initial gameplay prototype that I have in mind, the player is going to have an adversary, and they're going to be fighting with that adversary. The adversary is also going to be able to pick up these abilities. And so it's not just our third-person character that's going to be able to pick this up, right? It's got to be more general than that. And so because of that, I think this is the first really good use case in this series to use what's called an interface. And an interface is whenever you need to communicate from blueprint to blueprint, but it could be a variety of types of blueprints, then an interface is the way to go. Because in casting, it's like, I know this blueprint, and I know that blueprint, and I know we need to communicate between those two. But with an interface, it's like, if I don't know what actor I need to communicate with, or what type of blueprint that is, then I can't cast to it because it could be any different kind of actor. So here's another example I have in mind for the future, and this might make sense. So we're going to have an isFlammable interface, because as fire is hitting a particular actor, it could be any type of actor, right? It could be a tree, it could be a rock, it could be a human. And the question is going to be, should that actor be able to catch on fire? We can't cast to it because it could be a variety of different actors. So we're going to have to use an interface in that case, because the interface is basically going to say, okay, if this object can do X, and the X is going to be light on fire, then assess whether it should light on fire. So interfaces are the ideal way to communicate when you're not sure what you're communicating to. So to implement our interface, let's go back to our content drawer. We'll go back to content. We're going to create a brand new folder all the way at the front. And this is going to be titled Blueprint Interfaces. And we'll go into that folder, and then we'll right click, and then under blueprints here, we'll create a new blueprint interface. And I'm going to title this interface Uses Abilities. So basically anything that uses abilities in the game is going to use this interface. And we'll go into that, and we're going to create just one function for now. So this is pickup ability. And it's going to have a single input variable. So I hit plus sign here. And this is going to be our gameplay ability pickup. And I'll change this to our gameplay ability type. Object reference. Because what we're doing is with this interface, we're going to pass through whatever ability is being picked up to whatever can implement this interface. So let's compile and save this, and then back to our gameplay ability pickup actor. So then when this collision sphere begins to be overlapped by any actor, we can actually check, does implement interface. So does the actor that's overlapping, does it implement the gameplay ability pickup interface? So for example, if we have a bird flying around our scene and the bird flies right through the pickup actor, do we want the bird to be able to pick up our fire effect? Be kind of interesting, right? But probably not. So that bird's not going to implement that interface. So the interface here is just going to be our uses abilities. Uses abilities. And from the return value, it's going to drag out a pin, and we'll branch, and that's where we'll determine what to do if the actor does implement that interface. And then from that branch, we can drag out a pin, and we can search for our pickup ability. And that's the actual interface message, and it's going to be connected to the other actor that walked into our collision sphere. So we'll connect that up here. And I'll put in a couple of reroutes here. But before we actually implement this interface, the issue is that we need to tell it what gameplay ability we're picking up. And so from here, what we need to do, I'm just going to drag this out. I got to make some space. And from our true, we're going to spawn actor from class. And this is where we're actually spawning our gameplay ability. And the class is going to be our gameplay ability. And we have to connect up all the variables from our pickup actor to the gameplay ability that we're actually creating. We got our ability type. I could drag that in, connect that up, connect this up here. We've got our intensity, same thing. And the last but not least, we got our ability primary Niagara system, drag that in, connect that up here. And we also need to give it a transform. So we'll get the transform of our collision sphere, and we'll get the world transform of that. And that's going to be our initial transform. Connect that up there. Let me just make a little bit more space here, just like that. But now we got a couple of problems because our gameplay ability actor that we created back in episode 26, we never created a variable on there for our ability icon. So we need to go back into that actor and create that variable. But we got another problem. So let me actually show you this. So back into content drawer, content, go to our blueprints or gameplay abilities. And also we create a gameplay ability fire, which is a more specific blueprint. We did that in episode 26 as well. And the problem here is that in our event graph for our fire pickup ability, we are determining, okay, what type of fire ability is that? And then we're doing different things, and we do that based on this variable. The problem is this fire ability type, that is not exposed on our main gameplay ability pickup spawn. So right here. So we don't have the fire ability type on our gameplay ability actor. We have it on the child actor. And I realized that this is a design flaw with the way I initially designed it. So we're going to fix that right now. So what I should have done is, instead of creating this variable on the gameplay ability fire and calling it fire ability type, so I should have created an enum on the gameplay ability itself, and I should have named it something like how the gameplay ability is used, because I want that general enum to be accessible to all the different gameplay ability actors. So how it's used is like, is it channeled? Is it a single cast? Is it just a light or a display only? And so luckily we can fix this very easily right now. It'll just take about a minute. So we'll go back to our content drawer. And for this fire ability type, I'm going to right click and rename. And I'm going to call this instead how gameplay ability is used. And I'll go into that and we'll change the description as well. And we'll just say how gameplay ability is used. And I'm going to change the display name from light only to display only. And so now, instead of on our gameplay ability fire, let's create a variable on our gameplay ability for this. So I'll go to our gameplay ability, create a variable, and this is going to be how gameplay ability is used. And that's going to be of the type how gameplay ability is used. And this is going to be instance editable and exposed on spawn. And that way, when we spawn an actor from class for gameplay ability, we have access to this. Compile and save. And once we compile and save, go back into our gameplay ability fire. And this is where I'm going to switch out a reference to this. We're going to get rid of that. And instead, we're going to get a reference to how gameplay ability is used, get, and we'll connect that up to 3 spots. We need to connect it up to activate up here. We need to go down to activate primary fire ability effect and do the same thing. How gameplay ability is used, get, connect that up there. And last but not least, when we deactivate the ability. So how gameplay ability is used. And I apologize, guys. I was not thinking far enough ahead in episode 26. Compile and save. And the last thing we can do is for our gameplay ability fire blueprint, the fire ability type, we don't need that anymore because we're using this new variable. And that means we can just delete it here, compile and save. And so now, before we go any further with this, we actually have to go back into our third person character blueprint, because what we just did by changing this variable, it messed up some stuff. And by the way, you can actually skip this step if you're not worried about it, because in the next episode, we're going to set up our gameplay abilities to just work off of the keyboard buttons themselves based on our hotbar. But for a temporary step, if you want to, so let's go back to our core folder, BP third person character, and what we set up in previous episodes is just the buttons 1, 2, 3. So 1 is fine. 1 is our torchlight effect. That's going to be fine. So 2, we got to change that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our spawn actor gameplay ability fire. I'm going to delete that. And once again, we're going to do spawn actor from class. And this is going to be our flamethrower. So our class is going to be gameplay ability fire. And then once we select that, we can hook up our transform. We can give it an intensity of 100. Ability type is fire, and this is going to be our flamethrower, but flamethrower with UP. And instead of display only here, this is going to be a channeled spell. Then we connect that up, connect this up here. Do the same thing for number 3 right down here. So we delete out our actor, spawn actor, gameplay ability fire, spawn actor from class. Our class is going to be gameplay ability fire again. Gameplay ability fire. Well, let's connect up our transform. Again, our intensity is going to be 100. And how it's going to be used is a single cast, because this is our fireball. So fireball with UP, and connect that up here again. And now we can actually compile and save and test this out. Just make sure everything still works with keyboard buttons 1 through 3. And then next episode it's going to cease to matter, because everything's going to be done based on what's in the hotbar itself. So 1, and that's looking good. And then 2, that's looking good. And then 3. We got our fireball. And so now let's go back to our gameplay ability pickup actor. And the spawn actor gameplay ability, this is why we changed this to begin with, but we still need to add one more variable to our gameplay ability, and that's the icon itself. So let's go to our gameplay ability. We already added the how gameplay ability is used, but let's add another variable for our gameplay ability icon. And then for that, I'll give it a type of texture 2D, texture 2D, object reference. And once again, we got to make that instance editable, exposed on spawn, and make sure this variable is also instance editable and exposed on spawn. Compile and save. Then we'll go back to our pickup actor. And now we should have how the gameplay ability is used, and it should also show our icon. If you don't see our icon here, let's set it to none. Now let's come back and we'll search for our gameplay ability. There we go. So now we got our ability icon. Just going to move out this reroute, give it a little bit more space. And so now what I can do, how the gameplay ability is used, I'm going to promote that to a variable. I'll right click, promote it to a variable, and we'll call it how gameplay ability is used, and that's fine. And we'll also expose that on spawn instance editable for that one. And the gameplay ability icon, now we can hook up our ability icon here. So drag that in, get ability icon, hook that up just like this. And then the last step is we got to take our gameplay ability that we're actually spawning and hook it up here. Compile and save. But here's the issue. So we still have an issue here because we have 5 different types of gameplay abilities. Now we actually have one to start, which is fire. That's all we've done so far in this series. But we are going to have 5. And they're going to have different things, maybe different variables as we get into it. So we need a mechanism to be able to spawn the different actors of gameplay abilities. I'm just going to temporarily make a lot more space here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our ability type, get it here, and we're going to then switch based on the gameplay ability type. And if this is true, then it's going to connect here. And to start, it's just going to be fire. And I can change this now to gameplay ability fire. And all of this stuff is still hooked up properly. It's still working. But as we build out our other gameplay abilities in our game, then we can hook them up here. And we're going to have 5 different execution pins. So make sure your spawn actor is changed from gameplay ability to gameplay ability fire. And then the very last thing we're going to do here, because this is going to start taking up space once we have water, earth, air. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to collapse it to a function. Move it over here, move our pickup ability right next to it. I can get rid of one of our reroute nodes. It's going to be a lot simpler. Connect this reroute up just like that. And that looks a lot more manageable. So the last thing we'll do, we'll select our new function here. We're going to rename this to spawn gameplay ability. And so we'll compile and save that. And so now we spawn the gameplay ability and we're passing that gameplay ability into our interface. And that's connected to the actor. In this case, it's our third person character blueprint, but it could be another actor or whatever implements this interface. And initially I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could do it right on the controller? But the problem is the controller is not the actor that's passing through this. And so that means we have to set up our receive interface, our receive event from this on our third person character. And then from our third person character, we can communicate back to the controller. So let's go back into our third person character blueprint and we'll implement the interface. So to implement a new interface on a blueprint, we're going to go to the class settings that are up here. And I think this is the first time we've done that. But under class settings, it shows up in the details panel on the right. You've got your implemented interfaces. And right now there are no interfaces, but we can simply add our interface. So if I search for uses abilities, and there it is. And then once we add the interface, we have it available here on the left-hand side, and we can actually right-click underneath it. And for every function underneath our interface, we can say implement event. And then it sets up an event right down there. So let's just walk through this really quick. So let's say the player runs over the pickup collision sphere, and they do implement the interface. So then it spawns a gameplay ability, and it picks up the ability. And this, based on our interface, is going to call right here. So basically, we need to assess whether or not our player has hotbar space, because if they do, we want the ability to just go right into the first available space of their hotbar. But all of our hotbar setup is actually on the player controller. So for that, we got to right click and we got to get our player controller reference and get player controller reference. And then from here, we can do our hotbar check. And that's checking, does our player have space in our hotbar? And then for this, I can just branch out. Now, if they don't have hotbar space available, then what I'm going to end up doing is that this is going to do an inventory check. Do we have space in our inventory? But we're not going to get to the ability inventory until episode 4. So for now, we'll leave this blank. But if they do have hotbar space, what do we want to have happen? Well, we have another function for that. So player controller reference. And our next function is pickup ability. And we haven't yet built out these functions, but we will by the end of this episode. And what ability are we picking up? It's right here, right? We're passing that via our interface. So I can hook that up. I'll add a couple of reroute nodes just to make this look nicer. But there's one more thing here, and this might vary depending on what you have in mind for your game mechanics. But in my game, if we successfully pick up the ability, I want that pickup actor to just disappear and basically become inert. In other games, maybe that's a permanent thing and multiple players can run and pick up that ability. But in what I have in mind, it's going to disappear, and then there's going to be other abilities that spawn. So after our pickup occurs, we need to get a reference back to our pickup actor and then disable that actor. So the easiest way of doing that is if we actually pass through a reference to our pickup actor directly through the interface. So if we go back to our uses ability interface, the pickup ability function, and I'm just going to add an additional input to that function. So I'll come over here to the right-hand side and hit a plus sign. And this is going to be our ability pickup actor reference. And for the type, this is going to be exactly what we already built this episode. It's a gameplay ability pickup object reference. compile and save. So then in our GameplayAbilityPickup Actor, we can add a reference to self. So we can say right click and get a reference to self. And basically this actor we're going to pass right through the interface, creating a portal and jumping right through. So compile and save here, and then back in our third person character, we need to compile and save here. And when we compile and save our third person character, we get this error, event node, event pickup ability is out of date, please refresh it. So we got to right click on this again. Well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that out first. I will right click, we're going to implement the event, and there we go. So it's got our two different things that we're passing through the interface. I can connect it up here, connect our GameplayAbilityPickup here, and then for our AbilityPickup Actor reference, what I'm going to do is I'll drag out a pin, and we're going to set Niagara System Asset, and we're going to set that for the Pickup Niagara System effect. Yeah, so it automatically got that component for our Pickup Niagara System effect. So this is this right here, back in our third person character blueprint. So I'm going to hook this up to this, and let me just add a reroute just so that this isn't too crazy. Right down there, move this down here. And actually I'll add another reroute, and then I'll move this up here and the reroute a little bit lower. And by leaving this blank, so this is going to set our Niagara system to no longer be doing anything. And in addition to this, I want to turn off the collision on the collision sphere, because that way nothing else will trigger. Now I thought about just destroying the pickup actor, but I think I'm going to recycle these. Like I think I'm going to just move them to a different location, set up another pickup. And you'll see that in the future. I bet I'll do a pickup ability spawner or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll drag out a reference from this to our pickup collision sphere, and from that we are going to set collision enabled. So set collision enabled right there. Connect this up just like this to this, and we're going to set it to no collision. Compile and save. And between those two things, it's basically going to make the actor inert. And now we are actually ready to test this, but as it currently stands, this hotbar check, this is always going to return false because we haven't done anything in this function on our player controller yet. So on our third person character blueprint, what I'm going to do just to test this is I'm going to connect up our false pin here. And what that's going to do is when we have our GameplayAbilityPickup Actor in the world, if I go and pick it up and it has a Niagara system, then based on this, the Niagara system should just cease to exist. So this is temporary. So we're only setting this false pin for now. So compile and save. So now what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to drag our GameplayAbilityPickup Actor into the world, and I'll put it right near my player start here. And we're just going to give it a few different things. So the Niagara system display, I'm going to give it our torchlight effect. So I've got torchlight pickup. And what I did is if I go to content drawer and then Niagara, I created a new folder for gameplay ability pickups. And I just created a gameplay ability pickup Niagara system for each of the fireball, flamethrower, and the torchlight that we've done in previous episodes. So this is episode 23. This one's, I think, 27. This one's 30. And so literally I just copied and pasted the Niagara system. I think for the fireball, I changed like a couple of things so that the velocity didn't go in any particular direction. So something really simple like that. All right, so we got our Niagara system display here. So we don't have to give it an ability icon yet. We're just testing whether or not the gameplay ability actually vanishes. And we can keep our ability type fire, all that we can keep just as is. We'll save that and let's try it out. All right, here I go. I run over the ability and it disappears. So far so good. So let's go back to our third person character blueprint. Make sure to disconnect this false pin because that was just for testing. But now let's get our ability showing up on our player's hotbar. And the way we do that is we're going to start in our player controller because we created some shell functions, but we didn't actually do anything like this pickup ability function. But let's first start with the hotbar check function right here. So this is going to be really simple. First going to make some space. We're going to get a reference to our gameplay ability hotbar, and this is basically going to store every single gameplay ability that's currently in our hotbar. Now we want to make sure that this always has 10 items in the array. So on the right hand side under the default value, I'm just going to hit this 10 times. So we'll go up to index 9 because index 0 is our array element 1 and it goes up to 10. So for this function, the hotbar check function, all we're doing is we're checking to see, does this array have any open space in it? And then if it does have open space, then we're just going to stop whatever it's doing and we're going to send back to the return node, okay, it has space. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to search over each thing in this ability hotbar array. And so we can do a for each loop with break. And the reason we're doing it with break is that as soon as it finds an open hotbar slot, then it's going to stop doing the loop and it's going to come in here and then it's going to do whatever the completed has. So let's hook this up. So we'll hook up our exec here. And then how do we assess whether or not there's an item in our gameplay ability hotbar? So we've done this a lot. So is that particular item valid? So if it's valid, then we're going to branch and we'll connect this up to our loop body just like that. And now for each of the things in the hotbar, if a particular thing is valid, if it's true, that means that we don't have hotbar space. So I'm going to set our hotbar space, at least for that slot, that's going to be set to false. But if we get to a particular slot, like a particular element on this hotbar, and it's not valid, that means there's nothing in there. So in that case, when that evaluates to false, this is going to be set to true. We do have hotbar space. And also when this is set to true, then we can actually break. We no longer have to complete the loop because we know we do have hotbar space. And so I had to connect this all the way up to the break, and that's really awkward looking. So I'm going to do a reroute right there. I'm going to do another reroute just like this. I'm going to move our return node down here. And so the way this is working is it's taking all of our slots, so all of our 10 slots here, it's running through each of them, and it's evaluating for each, is it valid? Let's say, yes, it is valid, don't have hotbar space. Then it goes on to the next one. And eventually, if our hotbar is not full, then it gets to one where is valid? Nope, it's not valid. There's nothing in there. So has hotbar space is set to true, and then it returns that on the break. Completed comes here, then we got to take our variable, has hotbar space. And then we're connecting that up here. Because if it gets through the entire array, then every time it's going to set this to false, 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 and then it's going to finish regardless, and then it's going to return this as false. So pretend that our third hotbar spot is open. Pretend the first two are filled. So here's what's going to happen. So it's starting to check. So it's starting with slot 0. Let's say slot 0 is full, right? So it does the loop body, and it checks, is valid? Yes. It says has hotbar space. Then it does it again for the second item. And then it does the same thing. So is valid? Yes. Has hotbar space set to false. But then it does the third. So the third space, let's say, is open. There's nothing in there. Is valid? False. Then it sets yes, has hotbar space, and then it breaks. It stops looping. And then it comes down here. Has hotbar space set to true because of here, and it returns that. So the next function we're going to finish is the find empty hotbar slot. And this one's going to work very similarly. So what we can do is we can copy these 4 nodes, the GameplayAbility hotbar, the for each loop that is valid in the branch. We can copy all of that. And we can come into our find empty hotbar slot here. Just paste that down below. Because this is going to work much the same way. I'm going to break this. I'm going to bring this over here, connect this up, and the return node down here. So the only difference with this one is if this is set to false, then we're going to return the array index. So in that case, we're going to set our empty hotbar slot, and I'll connect this up here, put in a little reroute, and if it's false, connects up just like that. If it does find something in the hotbar, it just keeps going. It keeps going until it finds an empty slot, if any. But then if it does find the empty slot, then we're good. Once again, we can break. So I can connect this up here just like that. Double click here. Move it like this, and then I'll connect the completed down here. We'll take our empty hotbar slot reference, get, and we'll connect that up to our return. Compile and save. So now it's on to our pickup ability function, and this is really simple. So we just go to pickup ability, and we have our gameplay ability to pick up. And for this, we're just going to get a reference to our gameplay ability hotbar, get, and we're going to set an array element. And this is how we set something in this array right here. And we have to set a particular index. And the index we're going to set is our empty hotbar slot. But actually, I'm just going to get it directly from the find empty hotbar slot here. And that means that function, find empty hotbar slot, is going to be called every time we get an index. And the green function, that indicates the pure function that we talked about earlier. It's not executing anything. All it's doing is returning a value. And then the item to pick up, well, we got our gameplay ability pickup right there. And size to fit here, that just means that this array would expand beyond the 10 spots if there wasn't space to fit it in the array. We don't want to do that because these correspond to each of the keyboard buttons, and we're not multiplying our keyboard buttons. Last but not least, we've got to connect up our execution pin. But this isn't the last thing we actually need to do. So this is physically going to set our ability in the array here, but it's not going to change our button. And so for that, what we need to do is we need to get a reference to our button. And this is a little bit arduous to get a reference to our buttons because you're going to see here. So the first thing, we need our character reference. So we set this up, I think it was last episode. So get character reference. And that's actually set up in our event graph right here. So from our character, we're going to get a HUD reference, and that we also set up last episode. And then from our HUD, we're getting the ability hotbar, and that's part of our HUD. And then from our hotbar, we're getting the actual buttons. So our hotbar buttons, there we go, get. But we don't want all of our buttons here, right? So we want the button that's at the empty hotbar slot that we already found. So what we can do is we can get our empty hotbar slot, dragging a reference right there. And for this, we're going to get a copy of our button at that slot. And so here is where we're going to set the actual ability image. So I can drag out a reference and set ability image. And I can connect this up. And the image that we're setting is from our gameplay ability pickup. So we can drag out and search for ability icon, I think is what I call it. Set or get ability icon. And connect that up here just like that. Now the last thing I want to set here is we're going to get references to these hotbar buttons in other functions in the future, and this was kind of a pain to get that reference. So how about we select all that, right click, collapse to macro, and then I'm just going to rename the macro. I'm going to call it our hotbar buttons reference. Compile and save. One mistake I made initially is I hooked up our find empty hotbar slot to here. And the problem is that if this function's run twice, it's actually going to end up putting the ability into our second slot because the first one's already going to have our ability here. And so make sure to choose the empty hotbar slot variable that's set to our original value returned here when it's connected up to the get. All right, so now we're ready to test this. So let's compile and save. And there's still going to be an issue with this, but I want to show you how to actually debug. And so we're going to have the issue and then we'll go from there. And for your gameplay ability pickup actor, I gave mine an ability icon. You can give it any icon you want. And for each of the ability icons that I'm setting up, so I'm storing those under my content folder and then under blueprints, under our gameplay ability pickups in this ability icons folder. So if you want to use what I created here, you can actually find links to all three of these ability icons in the description below. And I'm going to keep putting links for each ability icon that we create into the standard spreadsheet that I link for every episode. And like I mentioned, we're going to cover how to make these in 3 episodes. I'm going to go through my process for making these simple ability icons. It's really unsophisticated, but regardless, you can follow along just fine by giving any ability icon to this actor. So you can just come to this drop down, really select anything here. All right, let's give it a whirl. And what I want you to do is take a look at the first button on my ability hotbar at the bottom and watch as I'm going over this. So you see it just darkened, right? So something is actually in that slot, but it's not yet updating the button style, and that's what we forgot to do. But let me just show you how to troubleshoot and make sure that something's actually going into that slot. So the way I would do this, if we go back into our PlayerController, there's an ability to actually watch a blueprint as you're playing and see what that blueprint's doing. And this is a really nifty troubleshooting tip. So if you right click on our gameplay ability hotbar here, and then there's an option for watch this value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a smaller window, like right over here, and then I'm going to hit begin play. And when I hit begin play, then I can change the debug object to actually watch this on that particular object. So it says simulating, and then I can choose my PlayerController that I'm actually playing on. It shows you what's in the actual array as I'm playing. So watch it change in slot 0 as I run over the actor. So there you see in 0, I now have gameplay ability fire, So I know it's working from a gameplay ability standpoint. It's just the icon that's not displaying properly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off that debug, stop watching the value, go back to no debug object. And the problem that remains is if I go back to our hotbar slot, and again, if you don't know where that is, that was under content UI. We did this last episode, hotbar slot. So we have these different button styles that we set up last episode. And by default, our empty button style, it's set to be an alpha, I think of like 0.25 and completely dark. So if I go under the tint here, yeah, it's just completely dark, alpha 0.25. And so that style is still being used because we haven't called our set button style function. Because here's what we want to have happen. So back in the PlayerController, we set the array element, we set the image, and then if we call that function on the hotbar slot, then it's going to check, okay, our ability image, is that valid? And it's going to be, yes, it is going to be valid. Is the slot activated? So when we pick up an ability, it's not yet going to activate that ability. So this will be false. But then it'll set to a different style, our ability style, and then it'll set our color and opacity. And the color of opacity for that is 111, so it's completely light, it's bright, it's going to show the button, and the alpha is 1, so it's not going to be translucent at all. So all we need to do, if we go back to my PlayerController, the pickup ability function, we just need to get a reference to that same button, and we need to set the button style. So we'll call that function, and then we'll connect that up right here. Compile, save, let's test this out one more time. All right, so I run over it and it works. And there's our icon right there. If I hit I on our keyboard, so I'm gonna hit I, and that turns on our ability to interact with our hotbar with our mouse. And then if I hover over it, you see it now turns green. If I press it, it turns white, indicating it's being activated. Now it's not actually doing anything. It's not turning on our gameplay ability yet, but that's next episode. So I'll see you there.